What's going on, everybody? This is the blockchain backer bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we'll be talking about the Bitcoin price chart along with the XRP price chart as the price continues to traverse sideways, potentially getting very deep into our accumulation schematic in here, as everyone awaits to see the directional break on Bitcoin's range and whether or not there's going to be this C leg to come in for Bitcoin like we typically do. I was asked questions in Markets in the Morning and during the Fed live stream this week. Where do you think the price of XRP is going to go to in the event of a C leg coming in here for Bitcoin? But of course, a lot of that just really depends on how long it's going to take for something like that to play out and whether or not this is happening today or if this is happening in weeks from now. Or of course, like we even showed over there in the Fed live stream, how it's very typical to go into these once you get back to the high. But even in the case of the S&P 500 back in 2020, the C leg was still able to maintain the low. Now, that's not the typical price behavior for Bitcoin. Bitcoin does typically go to set a new low in here on these C legs. So I, of course, have to just kind of remain cautious about that still occurring in here for Bitcoin because that's the typical behavior of what happens. But what price XRP reaches, of course, is likely dependent on how long does it take for that to happen, whether that happens here this weekend or if that happens 3 or 4 weeks from right now. As we saw back in here in this accumulation schematic, this range was broken to the upside in the event that that happened here just in the coming days where a break happened. Of course, well, you would likely think it's kind of just preparing itself for something like that to come, and that you'd probably just see a revert back to the height of the range that was broken out from. Now, you may be wondering, why are we even looking at these models in the first place? There do seem to be some differences here between these two and what's happening in here. Wondering why we're looking at these ones in here, but there's a specific reason why both of these are being reflected on when we're talking about the price of XRP and accumulation schematics, and really just this expectation that it's been like that we're probably just going to traverse sideways because that's what we typically do in here. These two price structures and price behaviors are not just pulled out of nowhere. Both of these are examples of price behavior that we've seen before in the cryptocurrency market where we get like a first leg up in the market. For example, this is what happens as an all-time high gets approached and touched. And I'll take these off of here really quick to show clipping the all-time high, pulling all the way back down to the 50% retracement level right after hitting that, then going into an accumulation to then try and break out of here, right? And so these are the accumulations we've seen before price is capable of actually getting its way out, hovering all throughout here, deep into the correction, right? Really in like the last phases of accumulation during these things, to then what? To try to go hit a 4.236 extension, right? Which of course is what we're talking about over here for XRP, as it as well has gone back up to clip the all-time high, pull back down to the 50% retracement, as shown down here, hits the 50% retracement after clipping the all-time high, right? Then going for the 4.236. And right, that's what the idea here is for XRP, to go for the 4.236 on the market cap, not necessarily the price chart, but on the market cap, right? These would give us waves of near equal length in here. That gets us out to that $8, $9, $10 price area, right? And then that likely becomes the end of the run. And that's the type of accumulation we get after clipping those multi-year highs and then in those last painful drawn out levels of accumulation in there. So the reason we reflect this, of course, is the context is similar. Getting back to the all-time high, barely able to clip it. This is how we traverse through it. Then when looking at XRPs, it's the same concept because this is back in 2017. So this is from May of 2017 until December of 2017. That is going to be all throughout here. When this range was completed, it led to another wave of near equal length happening in there. Well, if we were to get another wave of near equal length, where does that land us in? That lands us in that $8, $9, $10 area, right? So that this would end up being just a pause throughout here for another wave of equal length. Now, of course, you may look at this and you may say to yourself, I don't see the exact similarities happening in here. Look at this new high happening in here. Where is that over here? These are not the same, but it's really just a visual mind trick that's actually happening because we can isolate these in here to show that these really are the same. The difference here is that we're able to escape from this range and really just set a new high in this pop that happens in here, which is like Bitcoin back in 2021, where November it sets this new high, but the whole market doesn't. It's actually like a bearish divergence that happens in there. And then to reflect on it, that this is not what the whole market did. The whole market does just just this, right? Where it doesn't set this new high and actually does just hover down here to then go on and make the spill happening in here. It's just isolated to this one chart where it catches a little bit more momentum out of there to go clip that high. And then the same price behavior kicks in for the whole market and for XRP, right? And that you could see in here, this is really all the behavior right before it ends up going for the kaplunk. Just you get a little bit of an extra pop out happening in here than all the same accumulation. So barring the moment of hitting this new high when XRP exhibited more strength than really the rest of the market did during that moment, we have the same accumulation schematics happening in here as well with our other accumulation schematics happening where they should be happening. And both of these pushing for additional waves. And in this example, right, another wave of equal length. And well, of course, another wave of equal length over here on the market cap gets us right out there to the 4.236 extension of this range, which is also our 4.236 extension of our bigger range, right? That it still lands there, right? Obviously, this is that additional high set in there. I'm not going to gamble on that since that seemed isolated and was not a market-wide price behavior, right? If we were going to look at the whole market, we'd be using this one, right? We wouldn't be reflecting on that. But that our extension for this type of price behavior gets us to not only the 4.236 extension of this current range, but also to the full range of the entire going on 8 years of price action. So these schematics that we're looking at and these structures that we're looking at are those of ones that are continuations that eventually have waves that take you to 4.236 extensions. So that's why we use them. We're not just picking random ones to say, hey, these look similar. They also have similarities, of course, in appearance and price behavior, but also their context and what was going on with these assets when they were at these locations. So in late May, I said, hey, if this kind of goes like this, then you're probably just expect it to be like paint drying or like paint drying. But you can see in here, it's pretty progressed along. And if it did end up behaving like that, what would there be? There would be like flashes of hope, flashes of optimism, flashes of euphoria, flashes of, oh no, it's never coming back. We're never doing anything. This asset stinks. And then boom, it just, it eventually just breaks out after getting through all of it. But it's, of course, hard to know it's going to play out exactly like that, as there are some small deviations, but structurally, you kind of get an idea. It's really progressed along. The context of these accumulation schematics are taken from very specific moments in time, and their price behavior, or the price behavior of XRP, is really just right on cue. But we've spent this last month just kind of traversing sideways with it being really boring. Hard to drum up a whole lot of different things to say than what we've been talking about on Bitcoin, about the price action really doing kind of what was expected, that it would just be boring. But as we near ends of ranges, we can actually start to see some volatility start to erupt in there, and especially volatility start to erupt over there in the emotions of the crowd, where we start seeing flashes of optimism, hope, and euphoria, flashes of pessimism, fear, and panic as the end of the range starts to come to a completion. Typically, ranges are met with extreme pessimism. That was the case even last October and November. Then prices exploded, but the market was extremely pessimistic. So while it's been boring and sideways and no real emotions from the crowd happening in here, you could start seeing flashes of hope, flashes of panic, everything in between, and where the volatility of emotions actually starts to erupt, even though price doesn't really do a whole lot. And then when the crowd least expects it, boom, it breaks out and goes. Typically at that point, the crowd has kind of thrown in the towel for some reason or another in here. Usually the reason that happens is because when this move ends up happening, the crowd becomes overwhelmingly convinced that it is actually breaking out at this exact moment. And after the series of disappointments that have happened along the way, and then the crowd becoming fully convinced this is actually the one that breaks out, once it falls, that's the emotional breaking point. That's enough. I've had enough. It never does anything. It's just doing the same thing over and over again. It's never going to do anything. And that, for some reason, is the psychological breaking point, only for it to go after that one. And of course, like alternatively, if it just continues traversing sideways, you could see other things happening that cause the capitulation. We talk about it: price-based capitulation, time-based capitulation, jealousy-based capitulation, right? Like if Ethereum goes on a run or something like that, then there becomes the anger and the frustration in a different manner. We talk about that a lot, that there's always just some form of capitulation that happens, and they can come in different shapes or forms, whether it's price or time. It's just spent too much time. I can't do this anymore. I'm wasting time. I could have been playing in other assets, but I'm wasting my time in here. Or, of course, watching something else do well, right? And that was like what happened with Solana back in 2023 and 2024. Solana caught an early run, which still didn't set a new all-time high, but shot back into retracements, the crowd got very mad. And that was a perfect example of jealousy capitulation. So they can come in various shapes or forms or narratives or stories or whatever it ends up being, whether or not the crowd gets overly optimistic, only for it to pull back and do that and whatnot. And I'm just kind of talking about these things ahead of time in case they do come, because I do believe this is where we are. I do believe we're just really deep into this. We've been in that sideways, traversing, boring stuff, watching paint dry, which was the expectation before I went to Las Vegas, before I went to Idaho. Spend some time with your kids, do some fun stuff for a little while, boring. We could be wrapping that up here pretty soon, where it just emotionally becomes a little bit more volatile. And that's typically how ranges start to come to a conclusion. So I don't think we're breaking out of this range just yet. I think like the most optimistic thing to look for really is just that a price break out of here happens before Bitcoin slips into an completes the C leg. We're fully deep into this thing. A and B are already done. We'll see if it ends up being something more along the lines of what the S&P 500 did in here. Just really important for me to reflect on it and say that's not what typically happens for Bitcoin. For Bitcoin, it typically is a new low. These are all exact examples taken directly from Bitcoin only of these moments where these new highs get set, correction, and ABC, new highs, correction, ABC, new highs, correction, ABC. Where are we at? New highs, correction, right? ABC. It's just typically what happens. Still got to wait it out. A lot of the questions are, what would happen to the price of XRP? I think if it happened today, we'd probably see a liquidation in the market. It would wick down. But I think that's all expecting timing to happen right now. And like we talked about in the Fed meeting, I was like, man, it feels like way too many people are expecting it to happen right now, likely due to the geopolitical events and the Fed. And that if this thing goes sideways for a couple of weeks on end, that'd catch people by surprise. So while I don't know if it's going to happen the next day or 2 or 3 weeks, I wouldn't be surprised if we actually see the price of XRP pop up first before that kicks in. So that's why it's hard when people say, well, what price do you think XRP is going to go to in the event that C leg comes? It's too hard to know, because if that happens first, then it changes everything. So it's like, well, if it happens from here right now, it's probably going to wick. If it takes 3 weeks for that to kick in for Bitcoin, there's plenty of time for this to happen and then for that to all occur right there. So it's all just a waiting game on Bitcoin right now for this range to wrap itself up, to get a C leg, or to show some type of evidence of a breakout that the C leg would already be completed. At this point, if Bitcoin shot up and got back up to set a new high, I would be in the belief that's it was already done. But that's the only case in which I would believe that, because then it would just look like it was a contracting triangle ABC correction. Till then, we wait, we see how long it's going to take. Does XRP catch some type of pop first that pushes it up a little bit higher before that kicks in? The wait continues. The wait continues. But the big picture of it all, which I hope is what you can take away from all of this, is that we are very, very progressed through the whole thing. Now comes the kind of choppy ending stuff where we went through the really boring, go spend time with your kids on vacation stuff, to then enter the emotional roller coaster here at the end, where everybody gets super euphoric, super pessimistic, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, boom, then price break. So we're still just stuck sideways. The expectation heading into this month is that that's what this would really be, is just a lot of sideways stuff. Whether or not, we just have just a tiny little blip down in here to go. There's probably going to be volatility erupting in here at some point. This won't just stay like this and be boring for forever. Whichever volatility direction we go in, I think the messaging I'm trying to portray is that it's going to be the first level of volatility that we've seen in quite some time after it being pretty boring. And I'm not going to get tricked by the volatility either way. If price rips here, I'm not going to get tricked by it. And if price rips here, I'm not going to get tricked by it unless we actually see Bitcoin setting a new high. Then that can be like, okay, well, wait a minute. Now we've done a lot of these things. Are we actually breaking out in here? So we're progressing. I doubt we have too much more of this sideways stuff before a little bit of the emotional crowd comes out, whether that's optimism or pessimism. But that's what we need to start seeing here for this range to come to a conclusion. And the thing that, of course, would just make me unwaveringly become, okay, wait a minute, maybe we could start breaking out, is if that happened for Bitcoin. Because if that happens, then that's likely our C. It was some morph of like we've seen in the S&P 500. You usually do not go and do that unless you're completed. Until then, it's probably just going to be more of this stuff in here. Just anticipate lots of, hype on Twitter, hype on YouTube. Even if the price of XRP just kind of gets up in here into the 250s or so, but we don't see evidence of it here in Bitcoin. The hype will still come out I think there will be a time and a place for hype. I just think we need to see a couple of things align first. But we're close, right? We're getting there. And I'd love to come on here and post rocket ships inbound, surge incoming, gains galore. But I just can't do that until we see evidence of the C leg erupt or signs that the C is completed, like the S&P. Till then, we just kind of have to do what we've been doing, saying, hey, still a waiting game. And on XRP, it tells us it would still be a waiting game at the same time. But that's super hyper focused on the short time frame, right? We're talking about today. We're talking about next couple of weeks. But zooming out, looking at the months ahead, right? These are the pictures that are being portrayed in here. It's just about getting through that stuff there. And I think we've done a good job traversing it so far. So most of it seems to be completed, just kind of getting through the final phases of it right here. And then we'll start posting rocket ships the second those signs start to emerge. Till then, we'll head into another weekend with things looking just fine. And then when we get together next week, we'll look for signs of that evidence to emerge, either Bitcoin doing the C leg or it's surprising and shooting to the upside. Either way, so long as it just keeps kind of shifting sideways, this is going to continue to be the messaging. But rest assured, it will not stay like this forever. Those moves will come. So we'll check in on it next week. In the meantime, of course, you guys can read the most recent newsletter that was posted just a few days ago over here at blockchainbacker.substack.com. It includes a 22-minute audio voiceover recording that I personally recorded. You can also check out bcbacker.com with over 40 videos and 11 hours of content teaching you how to set up your own charts and indicators within TradingView and CoinTrader Pro. There are links within the description of this video to the newsletter at blockchainbacker.substack.com and to bcbacker.com. Otherwise, have a wonderful weekend, and we'll check in on it again next week. But all right, that's going to be it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice, and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.